We did a
Rounded
concert
up,
for them
so to
last
speak.
week as teammates.
Welcome.
Was it who had the cancer?
Oh, so yeah.
So it's-
That's your.
Going to get only in the 80s today. Is that right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Sure.
That's humidity you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. That's probably what's keeping it rolling.
I can't do anything with my hair.
Yeah.
It's a problem, isn't it?
Good to see everybody. I'll start off with this. I just wanted a happy birthday early to Joe Groner, although Joe has moved to Santa Monica.
No way.
Yeah, he had a fast job thing and he just talked to him yesterday.
So FYI. I forgot he works in commercial real estate.
I'm guessing this weather's better than ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good morning, good morning.
So anyway, FYI about Joe. After the service today, Jonathan Merritt, he was preached this morning and will preach at 11 o'clock. And then he will give a talk, dialogue, after the 11 o'clock service. Lunch is free, although there's no child care provided. But all are welcome to come to that. Also tonight, it begins. Babylon, Daniel's Courage in Captivity, also known as Wilshire's Vacation Bible School. Anyway, so that starts tonight. Did we get enough volunteers? Are they still trying to recruit volunteers? I guess it's probably too late to ask now.
I think, I got a list of people, I'm guessing that means they have no.
Okay. Later this week, the CBF General Assembly starts. What is it, actually? I always forget.
It's on that
Hyatt
page.
Regency downtown. So that starts Wednesday, 7:30.
And here read the flyer if you want to pass it around. It's right
Oh,
there.
yes. Actually, there's some activity starting on Monday, it looks like. Well, I'll just pass this around, people to see. So we've got that going on.
Downtown should be alive with Baptists.
Yes.
Fortunately, they're coming in, you know,
That's why I
they're here the first
made
part
the
of the
joke last week. I was like, do we have to share any parking spaces?
I was gonna say,
That ought to be
SBC's down
interesting.
there too.
But I think FBC is here the first part of the week, and then we come in, like, their meeting is we're coming. We're not the same location. We have the better
yeah.
location, y'all. We have, definitely have the better location.
I should know it takes longer to get.
What was the other thing? Oh, the blood drive is happening
I'll tell you later.
in 2 weeks. So put that on your calendars to remember to go to that if you normally do that. I assume that'll be in the James Gallery or sometimes we do it. I think the last few times we've been doing it in James Gallery. So that's all I was going to mention.
Rooms at the inn.
Yeah, I messed up on the.
It's Friday.
Okay.
Friday and
Okay.
Saturday, and I should have checked the sign-up sheet to see, I don't know if there are openings or if they've got it fully filled out. On
Abby
the
sent out
sign-up
something
sheets.
this week, they still needed people to do breakfast and return to the shelter Saturday
For
morning.
Saturday morning.
Yeah, but that was earlier in the week, so she may have gotten that filled.
I didn't check, but anyway.
So that is Friday night.
Friday night.
Starting.
Yeah, it starts around 5. I'm volunteered to drive, so I know I'm one of the drivers, and Friday night, pick them up,
Okay.
and then Saturday morning, take them back. But I should have looked before I came this morning to see if there were any other openings. But
Well, if you go to the registration page, it'll show you, it'll say full, or if the slots are all full, or it'll tell you 3 or 4 of 4 filled.
And
And you can go ahead and sign up even if it says full. We'll take extras.
I'll look before next Sunday and see, because we had talked about perhaps sponsoring maybe the August meal.
I think it's a great idea.
Carrie brought a hamburger thing, which went over really
Yeah.
good. We just need to find the
And
grill.
then
Remember
we-
the date
gas.
for that?
We would
In
provide,
August,
provide the food
August.
and we'd serve it. Yeah, I
is it
think it's a great idea.
sponsoring through funds or through number of
I
volunteers?
don't know, I mean,
or
it'd be nice if we kind of just did it. you know,
Okay.
But if we can get enough people. to do it.
usually it works best if the Sunday school class does it.
Does it?
Okay.
And I think they've got June, this month and July covered on that. And I think August is still open,
Let's
I think. Again, I'll check before next Sunday.
I'm sorry, I came a little bit late. Did you say anything about elder abuse?
I didn't, is that, we did the flyer on the email,
Right,
But that
exactly.
date for that
Thank you
is
very much for doing that.
upcoming on Thursday.
It's Thursday.
Right.
It's Thursday, June 14th, and I could actually use one more volunteer, but I know it's right in the middle of CVF, and if I had been on the ball or somebody, I mean, I tried to, this was not my plan to do this at Wilshire, but the other people on the commission just love Wilshire. And so, oh, we're gonna do it there, and the beach is charming, and I didn't know that, you know, but anyway, it's gonna be Thursday, it's 2 hours, it's free, lunch is provided, and I could really use one more volunteer.
Okay,
I know you're all terribly busy.
okay. Yes, Bert?
We still need host homes too, does anybody know, anybody? We're down to the wire, host homes for the young trumpet players.
Yeah, Bert's trumpet camp is, when does this
Starts,
start?
a week from Monday.
A week from Monday, so he's still looking for places to house some of his students.
They're good kids, they're motivated.
They need transportation.
Yeah, it needs to be somewhere close. Although, it's not, we can work something out, there's a possibility. We're flexible, we have.
Not tomorrow, it's the next one.
Yes.
Room is in August, it's the weekend.
Well,
on the 24th.
I'll start the
It's coming early, I think.
prayer request list. We'll pass that around and get back to that in a little bit. But in the meantime, welcome Jacob Top.
Hey, y'all.
Yay.
How's everybody doing?
Great.
Doing great.
Hot.
Is it my honor or are you praying and stuff?
We're going to pray at the end.
Okay. I'm looking for exile. Is there one of those?
Yeah.
Man, that saves me having to draw one. And I bet you're all going to be grateful for that. Usually I just draw it. That doesn't
You're not an artist.
doesn't always work real good. How are y'all today?
Great.
Good. I'm so glad that I've traded days with Matt Dodgel to be in here today. And this will be my last
Congratulations.
You got a position?
No, I did not.
Oh.
But I've moved out of the rotation.
Yes.
And so,
And please do, I was telling you privately, but that you did a great job on those 12 minor prophets. That's the hardest lesson in the whole one.
It is.
And Jerry gives that to a new resident. If you would, please coach them once you did, because you did a great
that was
job.
my first Sunday school class to teach here.
And you did great.
That's become a tradition to do that to the new residents. There's all 12 minor prophets. You got half an hour. Go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well,
brutal.
everybody knows why this is his last time in rotation.
Having a baby.
Yeah.
And so,
About 19 days, I think.
in 19 days. And so, but she's coming early, don't worry. That's what Alyssa keeps telling me. Usually what she says is right.
What does having a baby have to do with this?
The fathers get
Good
more
one.
involved
Good
now
question.
than what they did.
The residency for me ends August 1.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna move into a McKeever Fellowship, so I'll be around.
Good.
But McKeever Fellows don't teach the same way residents do. In fact, we step out of teaching so that there's more room for the residents, because we know you would all want me.
Yeah, that's right.
You're absolutely right.
And then the new residents wouldn't get to teach anywhere.
You're absolutely
Oh,
right.
y'all are my favorites.
Yes. Well,
So we can either go with Abraham or Paul.
Abraham.
Go with that, that's what I thought.
Thanks.
Okay.
Jacob,
Yes.
real quick, I had an extraordinary experience this week, and I was just gonna pass this word along to you. Councilman Magoo was asked to speak at the Lake Highlands Presbyterian Church, and he actually invited me to speak with him.
Oh, wow.
And I can't imagine any other city council person being
Right.
savvy enough to do that. And I met the minister who said that he had taken that long journey with Timothy when he was a McKeever Fellow. So if you need any help or any advice, Dr. Rice is his name at Lake Highlands Presbyterian. He's been through that with Timothy, and he'd be more than thrilled to
All right,
hear
yeah,
from
thank
you.
you very
It's a
much.
good church. They
Appreciate that.
love Wilshire. They kept on telling me how much they love Wilshire. I thought, well, that's nice. You know? That's heartwarming.
Well, we have a really, what I think is a really neat lesson today. It's not going to follow the normal format, I guess. There's not a lot, the questions and conversation will come at the end rather than at the beginning, the way we sometimes do, because we have some real material to cover today. I'm not familiar with Ruth, so this was a real gift to me because I've not taught Ruth before. It's just one of the many biblical areas I've had to address my own ignorance. And it was so fun to sort of look into and read and live in the world of Ruth for a little while. And so I'm very, very excited and grateful for this chance today. When you normally have books like Ruth that you're doing, like 4 chapters, do you read it all? How does this work? We do?
We can if you want.
Yes,
It's your
yes.
call.
I would love to.
It all-
I would love to. I don't want to at the beginning. I want to toward the middle and the end. Is that okay? Okay. But yeah, I really, that'll be great. So we'll set the context for Ruth, and then we'll read it, knowing what's going on in the book of Ruth. So, are any of you more familiar with the story of Ruth than I was probably? Can somebody give us just a rundown, or I
Quite a bit of loyalty from the daughter-in-law to the mother-in-law on that, after both had losses.
Right, and
And so,
Yes.
Judge.
Left Israel under conditions of famine. Naomi and her husband, Melchizedek or something like that. His name means,
Elimelech.
my God.
Elimelech.
Yeah, God is king. So they live in Bethlehem, which means the house of bread. But there's a famine in the house of bread. Names in this story are really fun. There's a famine in the house of bread, and so Elimelech and Naomi leave and go to Moab. And so in Moab, their children marry Moabite wives. Elimelech passes away. 10 years later, the 2 sons pass away. So it's just Naomi, Ruth, and a sister-in-law. Naomi decides it's in this world, women, they're not professions women can do to take care of themselves other than prostitution, really, to flee and go back to Israel, hoping to fall on the good favor of maybe some of her kinspeople. They still have land there that they might be able to sell or do something with to make something. They can't work it. They don't have the means to pay workers, but they still have something there. So Naomi goes back to Israel. The daughters-in-laws are going to go with her. She shoos them away. Very harsh words. One of them leaves. Ruth refuses to leave and goes with Naomi, devoted to Naomi. When she's of the age, she could probably be remarried in Moab and be secure and be okay. Instead, she risks her life, her livelihood, all of these things to return to a land that's not her own, just out of loyalty to Naomi. Once there, Ruth begins gleaning from fields, which is a part of the law. This is really interesting. We don't have a ton of time to get into it today. But if you own a field in Israel, you're not to pick all of the food off of that field. You're supposed to leave part of it for the poor. If you were, say, to pick all of the food off of your field and not leave it out there the way the Bible says, it's considered theft from the poor. It's really interesting. Your own field, your own food doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the poor. And if you don't share it with them, that's one of the things the Ten Commandments talk about. This is considered theft. It's really, really interesting. That's all I can say about that. So Ruth is gleaning food from the field of a man named Boaz, who is a close kinsman of Naomi's family. Not the closest, but a close kinsman. And he is very compassionate to her and her struggle. Naomi and Ruth devise a plan for Ruth to get in a little closer to Boaz, which we'll read in a little bit. It's very interesting. And Boaz is not coerced, that's not really fair, because that's kind of like saying it's something he didn't want to do.
He's a little gullible.
He's a little gullible, and you get the sense that he's really fallen for Ruth. And the text makes it very clear it's not because of her looks. It's because she's a person of integrity and worth and loyalty. All of the things that you would admire in a person is why Boaz falls for Ruth. And eventually, he ends up buying the land and then marrying Ruth to have children that will bear her husband's name. Kind of like Levirate marriage. I don't know if y'all talked about that in here, but if one brother dies, the other brother has children with the wife so that the brother's name lives on. It's the closest to sort of eternal life that is conceptualized at this point in the Old Testament. And so though Boaz doesn't have to do that, he's not a brother to the dead Israelite. It's a generous gift, which means that property that Boaz bought goes back to Naomi's family and won't stay in Boaz's, because the heir is from Naomi's family, not Boaz. It's a very generous gift. And it's a way of paying Ruth back for her integrity.
Would that have happened with the, I kind of got lost in this story a little bit, but there was a gentleman and Boaz tried to get to buy the property.
Right, the closest kinsman.
And the property would have transferred to him.
It would have. Boaz does this really neat trick where he says, and it's really difficult to understand because the texts, old ancient Hebrew texts, are split about 50-50 about what the Bible, what it says right here, and the NRSV just picks one. Has to, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it's split. The closest kinsman is agreed to buy the property to redeem it for the land so it'll stay in the family, which is also a generous act. And either Boaz says, hey, Naomi comes with the property, and you need to, I'm sorry, not Naomi, I keep saying the wrong names. Ruth comes with the property.
See, I thought it was Naomi too.
And you need to marry Ruth along with it in the way that he's planned, and then the property will go back to Ruth, which isn't the law. That's not how it goes. And so, and the guy says, oh no, I can't do that. Or, I think, and that's the version the NRSV goes with, I think the more plausible interpretation, and this is about half of ancient manuscripts, say, okay, you're going to buy the property, but just so you know, I'm going to marry Ruth, and I'm going to have a son with her that's going to carry on Naomi and that family's name, which means even though you've brought this property, it will be inherited by my son. So you can do it, and that is lawful. And so, to which at that point, the guy says, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would I do that? All because either Boaz, either way, is bending the law to do a generous act for Ruth and Naomi. It's not breaking the
This is
law.
a continuation of George's sermon from last week about the law.
It's a pretty hard bend, right? It's really fascinating. Okay, so the context for this story is what I think is really incredible and what we need to talk about before we actually read the story, as long as we have just a general sense of it. I'm sure exile is a conversation that comes up in here a lot as you talk about Old Testament, or do we need to do a refresher? Okay, we'll do a little refresher. So, we're totally changing pages for a minute. But just, I'm telling you, it's gonna be hard to follow. but in the end, it's gonna be worth it. Okay? It's gonna be worth it.
We're ready.
So David becomes the very first king of a unified Israel, all the 12 tribes under David's rule. His son Solomon inherits that, also destroys that. So at Solomon's death, it becomes a divided kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. That's the way for several hundred years until the Assyrian Empire rises, and eventually they conquer the northern kingdom of Israel and take them into exile, and they're dispersed and really just disappear at that point.
Great, thank you. Having a hard time seeing it.
And so, after that, the southern kingdom of Judah continues on for a while until the Babylonian Empire rises up. And then they march on Judah, Jerusalem. They conquer Jerusalem and destroy the temple. And then in 3 successive deportations is the word I'm looking for. They take people from Judah and move them into Babylon. It's a long way away. And then they do it again and again, 3 times. A lot happens while the Israelite people are in Babylon. Their religion changes forever. Culture changes, everything changes over here for a lot of reasons. One, this tragedy has happened to you. You are God's chosen people, mighty above the rest, right? You're God's favorite. How can something so tragic happen to you? So you have to make sense of why that happens. This is where we get most of the prophetic literature in the Bible. Most of it is one of the things the prophets are doing is explaining why the exile happened. One of their points is you didn't take care of the poor among you, and you didn't follow the law. You didn't follow the law. And here's why following the law becomes really important at this point. So you're not in Jerusalem anymore. You're way the heck over here in Babylon. You've made this huge journey. If you're going to remain a people, then you have to have some way to bring your people together, right? And you don't have a temple anymore. Prior to exile, their religion revolves around temple. Temple practices, temple worship, offerings, burnt offerings, all of these things. The text that anyway. After exile, you can't revolve your religion around temple anymore. So things have to change dramatically. So things pop up over here in Babylon called synagogues. We've heard of these. Synagogues are sort of like congregations, churches, where they would come together, and now you can't revolve your religion around the temple, so what do we revolve it around? The law. The law serves a lot of purposes here. There are dietary restrictions in the law, clothing restrictions, you can only wear certain things, look a certain way, eat certain things. All of these to distinguish us from the people around us. If we're in Babylon, trying not to be swallowed up by Babylonian culture and seduced by it, because it's very wealthy, a lot of privileges in Babylon. If you wanted to assimilate into Babylon, it would be very easy to, and very enticing. The economy's pretty good, things are going great. So if you're going to stay a people and not be seduced into assimilation in Babylon, then you need these rigid codes to enforce who your community is and who it isn't. And once a week, they all break free from Babylonian culture, meet in the synagogue to retell the story of the Exodus, to learn and study the law, and this is where so we have no evidence that prior to exile, the dietary restrictions, the clothing restrictions, all of that, are really followed at all in Israel. They're there, they're commentary, but religion revolves around the temple. After exile, that's not true. And you see in Jesus' day, the law is very important, because that's what let them survive as a people in exile. And when they got to come home from exile, they thought, oh, this is how we keep exile from happening again, is we observe the law. So, the Persians come along later, conquer the Babylonians. I know this is a lot. I'm telling you, it's gonna be worth it. So the Persians come along, conquer the Babylonians. King Cyrus lets the Israelite people that want to, this is after 70 years of exile, go back to Israel, rebuild a temple, rebuild Jerusalem, establish their identity again. Problem is, lots happened here in the 70 years that they've been gone. The Sumerians are around, which are Jews that intermarried with other people, right? The people that were left behind had to survive, and they did the best they could. So now you have this really big clash. You have the people who have been here all along, and you have the people who have come back from exile with this super, very intense reliance on Scripture, on the law, observing the law, just exactly so. And so how do you recreate Israel now with these two groups of people? That doesn't look like it, but that is the context Ruth is written in. It's not written during the monarchy of David. It's written far afterward. It's written as they're going back, trying to figure out what to do in this tension. And there's some other texts that are written during this time that address this very question that I'd like to read before we read Ruth. One of them is in Ezra, the other is Nehemiah. Very interesting. They're two different people who brought groups back from Babylon out of exile to rebuild the thing. And they have their own opinions on how to make this work with these different groups of people in Israel after exile. So, will someone read Ezra 9, 1 through 3 for me?
9, what?
1 through 3.
After these things had been done, the leaders came to me and said, the people of Israel, including the priests and the Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the neighboring peoples with their detestable practices, like those of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Ammonites, Moabites,
Moabites.
Good for you.
Moabites, that's Ruth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
They have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons, and have mingled the holy race with the peoples around them, and the leaders and officials have led the way in this unfaithfulness. When I heard this, I tore my tunic and cloak, pulling hair from my head and beard, and sat down appalled.
Yeah, for the next chapter, he prays and just kind of whines to God. So, verse 5, oh my God, I am too ashamed and embarrassed to lift my face to you, oh my God. But then he does it for another chapter and a half.
Jacob, I was under the impression that Moab, the area, was just east of the Dead Sea. And where is that on that map? Seems like it's that's over where Saudi Arabia and you know. So Moab, when it talked in Ruth, it talked that Moab was just east of the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
Which I was thinking was, you know, kind of like going to Fort Worth. I'm sorry, but that was my impression.
That map covers a larger area, and actually the map he was using is,
Here,
yeah.
Moab,
Okay, yeah, just east of the Dead Sea.
right there.
It's how they had to go to get that.
And the other impression I had, there was a verse in Ruth that kind of talked like there was racism, because she was told, don't go work in any other fields, you might be harmed if they find out you're from a Moabite.
Interesting, isn't it?
And I thought that was kind of racist. In other words, wow.
Hold on to that.
Okay.
Very, very. Okay. Yeah, so back to Ezra's prayer for the next chapter and a half for a little bit. He talks about exile, and at one point in verse 14 he says, if you found out we were doing these things, you've saved us so far, you saved a remnant of Israel out of exile. Would you not be angry with us until you destroy us without remnant or survivor at all? It's in verse 14. This is the fear Ezra is dealing with. Handling the law so rigidly is what he thinks saved them from being completely destroyed by God in the exile. So will someone read verse 10? Chapter 10, verse 2 and 3.
Shechaniah, son of Jehiel of the descendants of Elam, addressed Ezra, saying, "We have broken faith with our God and have married foreign women from the peoples of the land. But even now there is hope for Israel in spite of this. So now let us make a covenant with our God to send away all these wives and their children, according to the counsel of my Lord and of those who tremble at the commandment of our God. And let it be done according to your law."
Yeah. So I'm going to read 16, verse 16. Then the returned exiles did so. Ezra the priest selected men who were the heads of their families according to their families, and each of them designated by name. And on the first day of the 10th month they sat down to examine the matter. By the first day of the first month they had come to the end of all the men who had married foreign women. And so, and then the very last verse. So from there on it just lists names and tribes. The very last verse in the entire book, 10:44. And all these had married foreign women, and they sent them away with their children. So Ezra designates men, the heads of their households, to go through everyone in their family, figure out who has married someone who's not a pure-blood Israelite, and if they have children with that person, to expel them from the country. That's Ezra's. Nehemiah, similar story.
Right, he actually did that. I mean, that's what he urged them to do. They didn't actually do that, did they?
That's what it says.
Wow.
Verse 13, in Nehemiah, on that day they read from the book of Moses and the hearing of the people, and it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, the people of God, because they did not meet the Israelites with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them and cursed them. So an ancient story in Genesis. Yet our God turned the curse into a blessing. When the people heard the law, they separated from Israel all those of foreign descent. And now I'm going to the very end of the book of Nehemiah 13:23-7. In those days I also saw Jews, and this is in Nehemiah's voice, who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah, but they spoke the languages of various people. And I contended with them and cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out their hair. And I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, "You shall not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons for yourselves. Did not King Solomon of Israel sin on account of such women? Among the many nations there was no king like him, and he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil and act treacherously against our God by marrying foreign women?" So this is a little harsh. Any responses? How do y'all feel after we've read these verses?
Just for
Yeah.
the timeline context, this is happening after they have come, the Persians have allowed them to come back from exile, which they were forced into, the Babylonians.
Yep.
So this is happening around, the year would be
450.
450, okay,
Yeah.
That's what my book says.
okay.
It's about the day. I wasn't there.
That was a good
Thank
year.
you.
That was a good year, wasn't it?
So, whereas the book of Ruth, the story takes place during the time before David became king, right?
The setting of the story.
That's the setting of the story, which would have been 1100
Yeah.
BC.
It's like writing a story today about
King Arthur.
King Arthur.
And we're
It's,
trying to talk about what's happening in American politics, but we let the
Well,
King Arthur
Arthur's
characters.
A perfect example. King Arthur's written during the Second World War. It's a thing about, and Merlin tutors King Arthur, that the only use of power, the only righteous use of power is to stop evil empires and dictators that are set out to destroy the world. King Arthur is exactly that kind of story on purpose. And so Merlin transforms King Arthur into a fish, into all these different kinds of animals to teach him this lessons from the animal kingdom, right? And in every story there's an animal that's personification of Germany or Hitler in every lesson to say righteous power, King Arthur, the noble round table fights against this kind of power. And if Britain wants to remember our roots, where we come from, then we are a noble power who fights against Germany. It's a way of rallying the forces, right? Perfect example. So this is the setting, this is the time period when someone writes Ruth that's set 400 years earlier, telling a story back then that has implications for today. Did I articulate that well?
Yeah, I'm just a little confused, because I thought Ruth, I'm always confused. The date written for Ruth in my Bible, and oddly, it doesn't give the chronological timeline at the top, but it has during the period of Judges, 1375 to 1050.
Nah, that's not.
So you're saying, no, that's not right?
No, I can't
Okay.
believe anybody's even saying that.
Well,
But,
okay, I don't know who wrote this, but I'll send him a letter and tell him.
do that. Yeah.
The
So
King
you're
Arthur
saying it's written
stories
during this?
worked on all the way back in the 19th century, and they went way back,
Yeah.
and they changed as time went on.
That's it. Perfect. So, okay.
There, but they
So King Arthur wasn't, the Once and Future King is the King Arthur book that made it after. Is it T.H. White? Yeah, T.H. White, The Once and Future King, was the version of King Arthur that was published during World War II. Based on stories that went back hundreds and hundreds of years and had been around as folklore and myth and all of these things. Is that what you're saying?
Except that the 19th century was the time they brought out the King Arthur stories, mostly in, what is the book I can't think of, that was prominent. Mark, the author.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pardon my French. But anyway,
So this story, that's perfect. God, y'all couldn't get this any better. So the story is ancient, has ancient roots, and is brought back up throughout history because it's a great story that serves and teaches us many lessons about nobility, righteousness, what a healthy exercise of power is, love, passion. King Arthur's story is timeless for that reason. And one of the reasons that it's brought back up is to say something very specific about Nazi Germany and Britain's resistance to Nazi Germany. But the story has ancient roots, right? He didn't make up the story of King Arthur anew. He used a story that already existed.
So priest
Ruth.
Ezra would have condemned what was going on in Ruth.
That's where we're going.
Okay, okay.
So someone takes the Ruth story, who, like King Arthur, is a story that is already in place. It's already oral tradition in this world. It's not like he invents the Ruth story. But we know it doesn't get written down until this time in history. This is when it's cataloged right like this. And he's telling a story because it's a beautiful story of love and integrity and loyalty, risk, high risk to leave all that you have. It's a compelling just story. It's timeless. And it's addressing the issue of the day. How do we treat foreigners among us and foreign wives? And what is our relationship to the foreigners in this place, right? One answer the Bible gives in Ezra and Nehemiah is build a wall, strict boundaries, and kick out, and kick them out, right?
You know,
That's one.
Jacob, with that, for last 6 months, I really enjoy this class. For my age, I'm learning about Old Testament. What I have learned is this is a love story written by God to all of us here to tell the story about the family of dysfunction. Family had larger issues, other problems, and how God, in His own majesty, are trying to deal with His own people. And that's what I've learned.
Absolutely.
And that's when I probably going to stay again for another year to listen to some more about the Old Testament.
Here, here. And also says individuals are greater than the nation itself, that it's more about the individuals.
Here's what I'm trying to, and this is really difficult, but we opened a pickle last time I was in here about biblical authority too. So I thought we'll just run with it. Ezra and Nehemiah is one voice in a conversation. The nation is trying to figure out, what do we do about this problem? And there's not the only thing the story is about, as Robert's told us. It's a timeless story. Ezra and Nehemiah is one voice, and Ruth is another voice. And what the Bible does that makes me so uncomfortable, but I also find a lot of hope in, is it doesn't just give me the winner of the conversation or the argument. Ruth and Nehemiah and Ezra are both in the Bible. They're both right there. And I'm left to read and discern, judge. So, and that's a real challenge. That's a real challenge, I think, because you can do, and some really bad things in very recent history have been done with the Nehemiah and Ezra story. And they're biblical. And it's not a bad interpretation of Ezra and Nehemiah. It may be a bad interpretation of what God is doing in the history of the world in light of Jesus. But it's not an easy thing, and I'm very, I want the winners. I want the Bible to be a monolith to tell me this is the answer, but it preserves the conversation.
Well, it shows you how to ask the question.
And how to wrestle with it.
And if all you're presented with is just answers, and you've never been shown the process by which the questions were asked to get to the answers, then you really don't understand the answers.
Right.
And what you're describing is something that provides you the tools in which to ask the right questions.
And here's why I present Ruth in this light, because it would be a lot easier to just tell this as a love story, right? Because if I don't, then Ezra and Nehemiah are the only voice on how to deal with the foreigner in this situation. And that's harsh. It's pretty harsh. It may have been what needed to be done at the time. And I can't see Jesus going house to house, kicking out wives and their children. I can't. And I don't know, maybe I need to learn more, but that's just where I am.
It's pretty radical
today. And so I think that's our context for the book of Ruth. Now, we have about 10 minutes left in class.
You can probably go to 40 if you need it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay? Okay. Can we read the book of Ruth? How about I just read it a little faster? Or do we want to just read it quietly to ourselves?
We can follow.
Okay. And I promise I'm going to keep my commentary relatively short as we go. A couple things I want you to pay attention to. Listen for how many times Moab is singled out, talked about, how many times Ruth is called the Moabite. It's absolutely unnecessary and overboard. Forget it and pay attention to that, okay? In the days when the judges ruled, there was famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people in giving them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with me, with the dead, and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I have thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters. It has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people, to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Call me no longer Naomi, call me Mara," which means bitter, and Naomi means pleasant. "For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now Naomi had a kinsman in her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone whose side I might find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" This servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now without resting even for a moment. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him, Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Then she said, may I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some of this bread and dip your morsel in the sour wine. So she sat beside the reapers and heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. She picked it up and came into the town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gleaned. Then she took out and gave her what was left over after she herself had been satisfied. Her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, the name of the man with whom I worked today is Boaz. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a relative of ours, one of our nearest kin. Then Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay close by, my servant, until they have finished all of my harvest. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is better, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, otherwise you might be bothered in another field. So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, I need to seek some security for you so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. She said to her, all that you tell me I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and he was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came stealthily and covered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and there lying at his feet was a woman. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin. He said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask, for all the assembly of people know that you are a worthy woman. But now, though it is true that I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as next of kin for you, good, let him do it. If he is not willing to act as next of kin for you, then as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. Lie down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before one person could recognize another. For he said, it must not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Then he said, bring the cloak you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her back. Then he went into the city. She came to her mother-in-law, who said, how did things go with you, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, for he said, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. No sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down there than the next of kin, of whom Boaz had spoken, came passing by. So Boaz said, "Come over, friend, sit down here." Then he went over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. And then said to the next of kin, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, so that I may know, for there is no one prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you." So he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance." At this, the next of kin said, "I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, because I cannot redeem it." Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the next of kin said to Boaz, "Acquire it for yourself," he took off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have acquired from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred, from the gate of his native place. Today you are witnesses." Then all the people who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel." What a thing to say of a foreigner, right? Mm-hmm. "May you produce children in Ephrathah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. And through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is more to you than 7 sons has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the descendants, and it gives descendants. So here's the argument, right? It's this beautiful story. The story is just a beautiful love story, period, without the setting. But to reach back in history to this event and to say, no, actually, when we have welcomed foreigners, it led to the greatest king our nation has ever had. It's not just this thing we're doing. It benefits the nation. This is who we are. It's our DNA. And the mighty King David is proof of it. Okay. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I didn't know if we were going to get finished with that.
We have non-resident teachers in here sometimes. You could be one of those.
Non-resident
Yeah.
Love to.
Thank you, Jacob.
See y'all.
All right. The Tebows continue to remember their neighbor. Continue to remember your neighbor Nancy.
Yes.
I believe she was mentioned last week, and her health issues. And also remember their son Jeff for his perseverance and patience as he prepares for his next big test on June 18th. He's here now, right?
Yeah, they're living with us.
Oh, good.
So he's taking a test just from home?
Well, no, he'll go to a testing center here in the city.
Oh, okay.
The 18th.
We need to be praying for the church that's going to call Jacob, that to get that church prepared. So.
Yes.
Yes.
We did.
Make it sound like that.
Hmm.
They need help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does Kevin have a church? Same way?
I think they're both kind of in the same.
Okay.
So maybe
Well,
put them both on there then, yeah.
Kevin told me this morning that he had turned down
Yeah.
one call, so he's still.
There's some that wouldn't fit, right.
It
Yeah.
wasn't it, yeah. Two-way
Well.
street. Okay.
Carrie asked for prayers for VBS, for vacation, all those participating in Vacation Bible School, and for Marilyn Moore and her family. Her husband Paul passed away yesterday.
Hmm.
So this is a college friend of yours?
David and I went to college with him at the University of Texas.